We've been told that we have an alarming and disconcerting interview styles. We fired too many questions at you at once. Do you want to start off and then I'll chime in? No. You're in Ibiza, so it seems to me like that's probably a very good place to talk about the Spanish courts trying people for coca leaves as though it was cocaine, which is something that I've been interested in recently and heard about in a update call from the Ayahuasca Defence Fund in December, that there's been about 5 cases over the past 5 years where the courts have deliberately tried to interpret Mambe as being this equivalent weight in cocaine, and then that's had to be fought every time to make them accept that it's coca leaves. And yeah, I'm just wondering what you think is going on there and why they keep trying to do that, and kind of what's going on at a policy level that's like a kind of potentially willful misconstrual of what the substance is and how that works.
I think it's pure ignorance at every step. You know, the drug control, the international drug control laws. You know, one of the sort of foundational treaties is the one that was signed in '61, and that made 3 plants illegal, and only 3: cannabis, the coca leaf, and the popium opi, and also a bunch of the derivative products, so you know, cocaine and heroin, etc., etc. This was, of course, you know, it's been fought by a number of countries because, of course, it was just sort of like outrageous sort of imposition of you know, certain countries who happen to have a problem with, you know, in this case, cocaine or heroin, etc., over other countries that actually had been using these plants for thousands of years and had no problem at all. Like, you know, like Bolivia or Afghanistan or India. So this is a paradox. I mean, there's a number of plants and then also substances that have a history of traditional use, and I'm thinking, you know, ayahuasca and peyote and cannabis, and also, you know, coca leaf and opium. You know, most of the things that we consider drugs or illegal drugs that we call illegal drugs. And when you look at the sort of traditional use or the use in the countries of origin, you don't find a problem at all. They're actually quite sort of healthily integrated into the culture. They're highly valued and appreciated. And you know, there's that doesn't mean that there's no abuse, but that the sort of the benefits far outweigh the problems.
And I suppose tobacco is another good example of that, but on the legal end, where it's actually the Western commercialization of it that's created the. But would you say that's maybe going on with the illegal substances as well, that it's the Western appetite for them that creates the problems in the countries much more so than use traditions changing within the country in their own right?
Yeah, it creates the problems and then it creates the law. So and then in 1971, there's a new convention, and this is the psychoactive substance one, and it has the 5 schedules, and then the, you know, and that's where all the, you know, LSD and DMT and you know amphetamines and all of these things get put in these schedules. And then no more plants are put in, because by 1971 probably they sort of realized that it's going to be impossible. If they have to outlaw all the plants that contain DMT, they're going to have to be hundreds of them. If they're going to have to outlaw, you know, plus at this point, they're also aware of the fact that, you know, these plants have a history of traditional use, and it's a little bit weird to, so they say, okay, internationally, we're not going to do this. We're just going to recommend that nationally countries, they write their own laws. And with this, they've created a huge confusion everywhere. So what you have is sort of a gray area of the law instead of clear legality in most countries. So then this becomes a question, you know, has been in the Netherlands, in Spain, in France, you know, in the United States. There are psychedelic mushrooms the same thing as psilocybin because they contain psilocybin. Is ayahuasca the same thing as DMT? And is the coca leaf the same thing as cocaine? The answer, of course, is that it's not. You know, I have a metaphor for this. It's sort of the same confusion. It would be like confusing, you know, taking a caffeine pill with, you know, having a nice conversation with your friends in a coffee shop. Or, you know, or going to a wine tasting, you know, event with, you know, shooting pure, you know, ethyl alcohol in your veins. You know, this is a ridiculous confusion. It comes from the way that pharmacologists think, because they think in terms of pure compounds. But this is without, you know, cultural aspects and without, you know, many things that come with it. So when coca leaf begins to arrive, which has been very rare, usually, it's been like immigrant populations, Bolivian nationals, and also some gringos that have gotten into Spain, and they arrive with, 2 kilos of mambe or 500 grams of leaves. Then, the prosecutor will very quickly try to say that these are 500 grams of cocaine or 2 kilos of cocaine. This is happening in Russia with very often with ayahuasca, for example. Or if not, they say that obviously the intention of these people is that they were bringing leaves because they were hoping to extract the cocaine out of these leaves, and they were just going to do this at home. So, part of the trials and the process has been, sort of explaining to the judges that A, this is very different, that B, that B, coca leaf is not the same as cocaine, and that C, that is, thoroughly impractical, just economically, energetically, and just in general, in terms of, in terms of payoff, to try to extract, a few grams of pure cocaine out of 2 kilos of mambe. And with this, at least in Spain, the judges have been quite understanding. Most of the cases have been won and people have been released. But in other countries, it hasn't been like that. There's been a recent case of a person that got caught in Bali with 20 grams of coca leaf, and he got a 5-year jail sentence.
5 years, wow, that's...
Yeah. So, there's about, I can't remember, I think there's about, I can't remember, it's like 1 or 5 grams of cocaine for each kilo of coca leaf. But that gives you an idea of how much actual cocaine was in those 20 grams, really a tiny amount. But they got a sentence like it was 20 grams.
It's very bizarre when you consider that cocaine is actually one of the substances that's still used in some places as for medical use when there's not an alternative anesthetic, even though actually it's not one of the ones that's being researched as having more benefits now. But it kind of almost seems like in this context, it's being vilified even more so than if it had a kind of useful medical parallel that everyone was excited about at the moment, like psilocybin.
This person might have been better off getting caught with 2 grams of cocaine because it looks smaller. There's also been a sort of uptick in Spain of raids during ayahuasca ceremonies. This was very, very new. This had almost never happened before in Spain.
That must be unpleasant.
Absolutely traumatizing.
Yeah,
that
can
must
you
be.
imagine? Yeah, I mean, you can hear people screaming. I mean, it's awful. It's like full riot gear cops like storming into the middle of these sort of ceremonies with candles and people sitting on mats, and then they make these videos. They always cut the sound, but they make these videos where they just collect the most random objects, like like a rapé blower, like look at this, and here's 450 euros, and here's some feathers of a bird that we believe is from an endangered species, and this sort of terrible, but it's a sort of a new. It's pretty much established in Spain among sort of judges and law officers that ayahuasca is not illegal. But now what they're doing is they're going for new things. They're saying, yeah, it's not illegal, but it's being used in sectarian environments as a tool for chemical submission, or it's being used by people who are sort of falsely claiming medical effects. Which is true, some of the language that is used to communicate these things is unfortunately.
And that must have stepped up as the science has evolved, because there have been so many amazing ayahuasca studies in the past few years that, of course, people will be gravitating towards it for those benefits, right? So it might make quite a lot of sense that that's coming into the discourse when people are talking about what they can offer in a ceremony.
Yeah, I think there's a degree of ignorance that people don't understand what the medical corporation is and how proprietary they are of the concept of and the word medicine and of the word doctor and of course of the words for all the diagnoses and the conditions and medical conditions. So when you're using these, and they will get very upset very, very quickly. And this is creating a new set of problems that is much harder to defend against, because at the end, sort of criminal procedures is like, well, is it legal or not, and this can be argued. But when you go into sort of these sort of administrative things, like are you practicing medicine without a license, or is this some sort of like coercive, or they call them destructive sects? These things are much more difficult to prove or to defend against.
I mean, I question how appropriate the term medicine is as well, only because of the sort of Western idea, the Western connotations around the word medicine, and that cultural pattern of being
passive. I guess there's a sense that you outsource your healthcare and someone else who knows better than you tells you what to do, and you take the substance and you just wait for whatever they said will happen to happen. Whereas in a ceremony, you're having this communion with the experience and you're fixing loads of things, and it's a much more active process, which I think in some ways is kind of the anathema of going to the doctor, is that has become customary.
Yeah.
I think, you know, sometimes lately I've been thinking a lot about the concept of care, and this, you know, the reason, you know, now in Spain there's a big pushback from sort of traditional doctors against what they call pseudosciences, you know, that this sort of homeopathy and acupuncture and these things, they've gotten really popular in Spain to the point where, you know, you can buy, you know, homeopathy in pharmacies, and you can get you know, master's degrees in acupuncture and even in homeopathy in famous universities that have also, you know, respected medical programs. So now there's been a huge pushback from the sort of medical establishment against these, and they complain that this is like pseudoscience and blah blah blah. And it reminds me sometimes of the way the church in Spain will complain that, you know, people no longer go there. You know, without ever wondering, you know, just why is it, you know, what's the sort of message that is being delivered there, you know. And when I think, you know, my own experiences with, you know, going to the public, you know, primary care doctor here, I'm basically facing a person that is only looking at their computer and writing things down because they have to fill this up before I leave, and they only have 15 minutes because that's how long it is. You know, so they will listen to me without looking at me and looking at their screen and typing, and then they will either, you know, order some tests, you know, blood tests, you know, X-rays, whatever, or prescribe some medicines, you know, and they do this in 15 minutes. And so the technical, you know, sort of the medical aspect, I guess, is there. What is lacking completely is the care, the personal relationship, you know, this everything that you get, you know, when you go to an acupuncturist. Well, tell me, where does it hurt, and blah blah blah. And then they touch you, you know, they spend an hour with you, they actually make you feel things, you know, they engage with you, and they see the thing as a whole. You know, there's like, it's not just your backache, but, you know, it's also your leg, and how is this connected to this other thing, and blah 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 blah. So, and of course, you know, you go all the way to the Amazon, you know, and you go with, you know, sort of indigenous ayahuasca healers, and I just remember some just sort of hilarious sort of encounters that I've had with with them, you know, where, you know, the conversation goes sort of like, no estás bien, no, pero ya te vamos a curar. Right, so it's like it's you know, I remember it's like, yeah, saying like, yeah, you're not, I'll translate just in case, you know, you're not doing well, but we're gonna heal you, and then there was another one who told me, ya te vamos a curar para que no pienses tantas cojudeces. Which was, we're going to cure you already, so you stop thinking so much bullshit. That's literally what the doctor says. So, you know, it's a completely different relationship. That
and what
certainly
did that one
you.
identify as? Was he a curandero, or was he, what was his title?
He was very much a curandero. Yeah, he worked mostly with tobacco and with perfumes in the Peruvian jungle. Very old guy, very funny. And and I was thinking lately that there's a new definition of placebo that I really like. Is my favorite one so far. I've been fascinated with placebo because it amazes me that, you know, basically we're talking about self-healing, right? So if you give people a placebo, you give them an inactive substance, and yet there's sort of like a physiological change. So, you know, there's a sort of self-healing that happens. And yet we're trying to discard it as some sort of mistake or error or something wrong, and we give it sort of a despective name like placebo, like it's supposed to be like, you know, like it's just, it's like, oh, you believed, you've been fooled, and therefore it doesn't count. It's like, why doesn't it count if there was actually an improvement of the symptoms? Like, why wouldn't it count? Because what? Because there was not like a pharmaceutical element, you know. And so, you know, traditionally sort of placebo was sort of called, you know, some sort of like self-delusion, like, you know, there's the, you know, yourself, the person has been deluded into believing that they've been given something, and that's why there's a change that happens. But you're actually trying to write that off in scientific experiments.
They did do a study, they did a study on life expectancy once. Two groups of people, they had the same diagnoses, and depending on how long they told them they were going to live, had a very, very measurable effect.
Yeah, and that's nocebo, right? But the thing is, actually, you don't even need to fool people. You can tell people, listen, you're not going to believe this, but we found that for people in your condition, you can give these pills. They're actually inactive pills. They're sugar pills, but if you take them, you will get better anyway, and it still works. So it's not about the person being deluded or being fooled. It's about a form of consent that happens from the person that receives what is in fact an act of care, and what the effect that has on the person. So now the new definition of placebo that I like much better is that placebo is a physiological reaction to an act of care.
There is another word for that. That the Academy coined it, Hawthorne effect. Does that ring a bell?
That does ring a bell to me actually as well, because Hawthorne was meant to be good for heart disease, but it wasn't actually that good. But it still works.
It was a person. They were trying to make factory workers like happier and sort of better workers, and so they sent, you know, lots of like researchers in to figure out how they could have a happier work environment, and they reached the conclusion that just the fact that the experimenters were there paying attention to these people and like asking them about
their work, caring about them.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's like, you know, Spanish medical doctors get upset about the pseudotherapies and the pseudosciences. They're just sort of failing to acknowledge, you know, that the reason why these people keep going there is because the care is much better, you know. And I'm not even going to go into whether homeopathy works or not. It doesn't even need to work. You can still, you can accept, no, I don't, but you can accept that it's complete, you know, and it's still effective, because that's what is at play there, and that's what people need. They not only need, you know, medical care. They're not, you know, like a car that you take to the garage and it just gets, you know, you take a part out and you put a new one. I wish we were like that, but we're not. You know, we're sort of human, and suddenly we require all of these extra things, you know, and modern medicine denies all of them and tries to write them off.
But then you get it on both sides, don't you? Certainly, like many people here who are against pharmaceuticals fundamentally, you know.
Yes, I think there's definitely a psychedelic exceptionalism that results in a probably quite unhealthy purist way of looking at things. That
very like us and them sort of.
Has as much segregation built into it as disapproving of psychedelics.
You need both, right? It's about identity. So you need what you prefer and you need what you reject. So to make you sort of believe that you're sort of standing, you know, to sort of give shape to your identity. You know, once I heard somebody say that the immune system is the physiological equivalent of our identity. So, you know, the immune system is what tells your body what is your body and what is not your body. And this cell belongs and this cell doesn't belong. This cell is an outsider. And in a way, your personality is the same. This is who I am and this is who I'm not.
And I guess you've got to differentiate that in terms of what's around you. There's no ability to do that in exclusion from the environment as a whole. So you're always going to be responding to it.
Well, we're not really taught to hold contradictory opinions either. or to be more than one person. You know, that's pathologized, isn't it?
Yes, and to reduce ambiguity as far as possible rather than to accept it how it is.
And we put all sorts of outside things in our body. We put food in our body of every sort and type, and the immune system doesn't reject that, right? It's what are the pathogens, you know? And then in the identity, that becomes just like, okay, well, no pharmaceutical drugs, or no whatever, or I accept this, but no Trump voters, or no, you know, or absolutely no Irishmen, or, you know, whatever.
Plants. I'll only take psychoactive plants, and LSD is evil. It annoys me so much.
One of the things that I've wondered
about
how
identity gets built, you know, or meat, or eggs, or, you know, or MSG, or, you know, everybody. The thing about this is that I think it's confusing when you look at it in terms of individual sort of choices, but it's universal when you understand it in terms of thresholds. Everybody has a threshold, you know, whatever it is. So you can look at it with, for example, personal hygiene. You know, some people need to take a shower every day, and that's their threshold. Some people can go 5 days, and that's their threshold. Some people can go 2 months, but everybody has a limit, a threshold. That's what's common. At which point they're like, okay, this I cannot go beyond. Right?
one of the things I'm really curious about in relation to this is people don't tend to have kind of media dietas in the same way that they'll have a food dieta before an ayahuasca experience necessarily. I mean, sometimes there's the advice to do that, but I feel like people's consumption of media is so intimately related to what they feel about what they do and don't consume. And in a way, like this unchecked consumption of mainstream media that has all these attitudes that it's trying to inculcate you with that bleed directly into how you feel about drugs, and then how drug policy is formed on the basis of people's opinions and what's in the newspapers, and it's this really kind of intricate knotty trifecta. But yeah, I'm curious about how you feel the mainstream media plays into the attitudes that are shaping what we've just been talking about, and if you think anything could be done to improve its influence.
I think, you know, I think probably for now, for the present time, perhaps it's easier or more correct to talk about screens rather than media. But I think future generations might look at our screen use in the same way that we look at the way that people in Mad Men drink and smoke, but sort of like excessive and constant. You know, so, you know, in the you know, these people had an ashtray on their bed, on their bedstand, you know. They woke up in the middle of the night and smoked and lit a cigarette, you know. And they even woke up in the morning, and the first thing they did while they were still in bed was smoke a cigarette. Right now we think that's sort of outrageous. There was all of these people smoking in bed, and even fires coming from people smoking in bed, right? All of these things are gone, you know. But now instead we wake up in the middle of the night and we reach for our mobile phone, you know. We wake up in the morning and the first thing we reach is for the mobile phone. And we are in a level of usage and constant pickups that perhaps to future generations might seem completely, you know, sort of excessive, and it probably is. I've only done one media dieta. It was suggested by Charles Eisenstein in a course that he had, which was sort of like a course. It was very interesting. It was sort of like how to be a change maker and don't fall into desperation or cynicism type of thing. And that was the first dieta, and it was a media dieta, and you couldn't read any news, anything. And it was absolutely wonderful. And the point that he was trying to make is just because you don't get to realize that actually the world goes on, the world is fine, the cars are running, people are saying hello to each other, being nice, you know, and you're in problems that are, you know, thousands of miles away that you can't do anything about, that reading about and getting upset about doesn't change anything. The only thing it changes is their ability to sell more advertising, because making you upset keeps you glued to the media. You know, outrage is a great sort of traction builder. So it was very interesting. looking at my daughters, which are now the first generation born with the internet and the screens and the mobile phones, and that don't have a part of their lives before all of this.
Sometimes
It's kind of worrisome.
I've wondered whether the generation, like our parents' generation, is more addicted to things like Facebook.
I definitely feel that.
Strongly feel that.
And it's also interesting because they're also the generation that grew up with the war on drugs being fought really prevalently and have this really strong idea of what addiction is and what it isn't, and like terror of drugs being addictive regardless of what they are, just because of the media portrayal, but then kind of unable to put down a phone without being able to recognize. And I guess maybe it would be different in somewhere like Portugal, where there's a kind of parity between addictive substances and addictive activities, but in the UK and the US there really isn't that.
Well, I think it's fair to say there's less community as well, and I think it's probably not fair to say generationally, but generationally and culturally.
Yes.
You know, if you live in Manchester and it's dark for 18 hours a day, and freezing cold. And
did your conceptualization of your thoughts become as though there were flavors of the media when you didn't have the media? Because that happened to me when I did a silent meditation retreat. So I was without any kind of external impetus for 10 days. And I started to get this sensation of kind of like, that's a Daily Mail thought, that's more of a kind of tabloid thought, that's a novel thought. And it kind of felt like all of these types of media were recontextualizing themselves in what I had available, which was just my own thinking. So I'm curious if that's just me or if you had anything similar.
It's interesting. I found that I started dreaming about it.
About media?
Yeah, about getting an email or reading something, and it's sort of like when I've done fasts and you start dreaming about food. It might be related. I never thought about it.
And how did you feel about it in your dreams? Were you like excited that it was happening?
Yeah. Oh, very engaged.
So funny. I've always loved it. I've had 2 occasions where I've not had a phone for a few weeks, and it really changes your experience of the world as well. Like, it's so many like synchronicities happening, and I meet more people, you know. It's a lot more. There's less of a pattern, right? Because you're more open to your patterns being broken.
Yes, and I think also much more able to, for instance, really engage with a beautiful moment when you're not taking a picture of it. And it was really weird, actually, the first few days in the breaks and the meditation retreat, be kind of walking around the Chiapas countryside, and I'd think, wow, this is an amazing tree or sunset, and then I'd kind of reach my hand in my pocket and realize I didn't have a phone. And after a while, that became wonderful.
Do you think your memory of that is stronger because you didn't?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Also, because unless you memorize the kind of specific tree roots on your way out of the garden and into the wild, you'd never be able to get back. So you really, really needed to have a conceptualization of some of the specific nuances of the sites.
I feel concerned about my own memory, and I think that's probably because everything. If someone tells you something, it's there. It's that you just look.
It's outsourced.
Yeah.
I remember it's terrible.
Yeah. But like how we can't
need it.
navigate. Yeah. We don't need to remember anything or navigate anymore. So
is that one of the biggest differences in the worlds that you tread in between the indigenous communities and then the policy realm of things, where the knowledge is much more something that's been passed down over generations and is kind of stored in the consciousness of people versus being looked up and kind of culturally conditioned in policy? Is that something that kind of plays a lot into how people discuss the things that they talk about in relation to substances?
My impression of policy is that it's a sort of highly complex sort of intertwine of rules and personal relationships and sort of forces, so there's sort of like Congress or the Vatican. They're very sort of established and set complex rules that theoretically everybody has to follow about how many votes you need in order to change this and that, and when is going to present it and how long you can speak. And then there's an incredible amount of sort of, I don't know what to call it, stuff that happens in the hallways, where things and conversations that happen at the personal level, where things actually get cooked, that are then pushed through this.
That's very much how it is in England. I spent the past 3 years working in a group called the Conservative Drug Policy Reform Group. It's a lobby group that its main campaign is to reschedule psilocybin. I grew very, very disillusioned because of exactly what you were just describing, and because it felt like no change was necessarily ever going to happen because the whole system was rigged against change being made. So it was just this endless process of writing these very slightly differently languaged texts full of buzzwords and slogans that were not allowed to be significantly different from the last one, because otherwise it would be too radical to be digestible. So the change had to happen at this slow rate in relation to, is that the same everywhere that you've engaged with policy? That
I think so. It's the nature of those systems. And then what I have sort of seen or observed in indigenous communities, but again, they're much smaller, is that there is this lack of that sort of structural part about how many votes do you need in order to get, this or that, whatever. That's not prominent. And of course, the relations are very prominent. And also there is sort of very clear limits about, the peace that must be maintained. People that live in a tribe, they don't choose to live with each other, and they have to live with each other forever. So they until they die usually. And so there's not a lot of space for things that we take for granted, like getting very upset with someone, or having a fight and never talking to anybody. We are in a place where we have a disagreement with someone, or a strong disagreement, we can move to different neighborhoods or even different cities or even different countries and never see this person again. Tribal people don't get this, so they are sometimes early sort of anthropologists and stuff that came from Freudian perspectives, they consider them to be very highly repressed, that their emotions were highly repressed. But by this they mean that they look very stoic, and they rarely ever express their opinions, and certainly their emotions in a very strong way. But this is, of course, has to do with the fact that this person is going to be there probably until you die, or until they die. So there's not that much room for really making a. So when this comes to the level of politics, and there's disagreements among, should we go this direction or that direction, among groups where like the sort of the authority of the chief, it's very relative. The authority comes from certain capacity or charisma, not from a power that they actually have.
Do most of the I just wondering, do most of the communities that you work with, do they speak Spanish, or do you have translators?
They have they spoke there's usually a few people that will speak some Spanish.
Right.
And then you need translators. And then this also comes from, observations and conversations that I had with other people, and that explain this to me. But in summary, it turns into very, very long debates. It looks like endless debates.
Yeah.
They look like endless debates, where people are given freedom to talk for a very long time. Nobody's interrupted. And they just go on and on and on. And sometimes it feels really, really repetitive. But no one will stop anybody else. And then when people finish, no one will really contradict them either. They will say something like, my thought goes in this direction. But
they're not trying to win.
It will not be like our politicians arguing. And what they're doing is that they're building consensus instead. And that takes a long time, because everybody has to repeat and repeat and repeat until slowly the discourse sort of gels into a common discourse. But it's not a give and take. It's not a give and take. It's not a negotiation. Well, I'll give you these two things if you agree to sign up to this other thing, as we sort of like to do, or as our politicians do.
Yeah, it's a gradual moving into multiple perspectives.
Or just that, or no, I mean, there is a sort of consensus there, or some sort of what they agree that they're going to do, but it's just sort of massaged into existence. Instead of nailed into nailed into shape.
Oh, we did a session last year on that was largely about the metaphor that argument is war, how it's, you know, like she shot him down, and
we were talking about that yesterday, actually. With we had Petra Cave, who's a molecular biologist, was talking about death as a long presentation, and it was amazing. But one of the things that she was talking about was in trying to recover from cancer, the battle imagery, the fighting cancer, the sense of a battle is really, really unhelpful, and it just puts this kind of sense of a potential defeat in that needn't be there, which I think relates to what we were talking about with the placebo earlier, kind of adds a layer of negativity that can potentially really hamper the healing.
Yeah, because how you narrate something is your experience of it to some degree, isn't it? And it's
never surrender, no fear, you know, all of these things that sort of speak to the Western need for control.
And another thing we talk about a lot is the standardization of the media narratives, the discourses, the metaphors around psychedelics, like the brain reset and the ego deaths and all this stuff that just or the rebirth.
Yeah, having a personal transformation, but without explaining what that actually means, because out of the scientific papers in which it does mean something when it's used technically, it doesn't mean anything when it's just kind of pulled out and used in an article.
And you have to use the language for it, don't you, if you're a journalist, for the
well, you do for the keywords, because the keywords that have been used again and again get higher rankings, so you're pressured to put them in, which means that even if you're actually a good journalist, and because I do the press for Breaking Convention, so I work with a lot of journalists to try and get good articles about psychedelics out into the world. And so much of the time they'll write them, and then an editor will put in some of the buzzwords that they feel should be there. And I think one of the ones that really annoys me is a powerful dose of MDMA. It can't just be a dose of MDMA. Like, they love to say a powerful dose of MDMA. It's just like, well, it just is the dose that it is, and it has the power that it has within that person, and everybody is different. But like, a powerful dose of MDMA is now a buzzword, so that goes in.
The idea of an editor in a suit making that change makes me feel a bit nauseous.
I always find most sort of neuroscience metaphors so incredibly crude. Like when they actually sit down and they explain it to you, it's like, and you're a big time scientist and you've studied this all your life, and it comes down to this simplicity of you know, it's amazing how crude they are in many ways, you know, really sort of simplistic explications. Even, you know, like the way sometimes, you know, evolutionary theory is used to explain everything. It's like, well, this could only exist because evolutionarily it must have been advantageous for somebody to do it that way, and that's why we're still doing it. And you're like, really? How is this what being a scientist means? Like, you know, like just coming up with the simplest possible explanation and then using it on absolutely everything for, you know, I don't know, things like I'm thinking now. I don't want to, but sort of the default mode network, you know, the you know, these sort of metaphors that are just like, yeah, so crude, you know, the chemical clocks and the chemical keys and it's all, you know, and then the brain circuitry, you know, as if like, you know, now it's gotten rewired and it goes around.
Rewire your brain.
It's like, I mean, it's like, you know, your brain there's a great,
and then you go back to being a blank machine.
It's all from Simple Machines, exactly. There's this great line from I think Terence McKenna, and he says, you know, the most complex a system in the known universe is the 2-pound bag of, you know, gray matter sitting between your ears, right? There's more complexity there than in the entire known universe from the Big Bang to here, right? In terms of sort of galactic forces and stuff. And and because you can actually, you look at the stuff with telescopes and sort of figure out, they figure out the mass of the universe, right? They figure out the size of the universe. The universe, they actually are, it's sort of, humongous, but sort of figurable, but your brain is like impossible. I mean, it's so incredibly, it's bioelectrical, biochemical thing, right? And then it just gets reduced to some circuits and some connections and there was this great line. I think it was Benny Shannon, and he said that looking at neurons firing, it's like which is a lot of what they sort of, they take the neurons out and they put them in a petri dish and then they look for peaks, right? That's a lot of neuroscience. He said, looking at neurons firing is like looking, it's like lifting the cover of a piano, looking at the hammer hitting the strings and saying, see, that explains the symphony.
Yeah, that's a really good way of putting it.
The symphony is over there. See that? See how it's hitting? See how it's hitting and the things are vibrating? That's the symphony. That explains everything. The hammers are hitting the strings.
What do your friends in Indigenous communities think of some of these metaphors? Do they encounter them and find them completely ridiculous in terms of their understanding of what's going on in their cosmologies?
I mean, not necessarily.
It might be difficult to encounter that though,
Yeah.
because if you got a translator.
Oh, I guess I meant in conversation with you
think-
and that kind of thing.
I don't think Indigenous people have necessarily more complex metaphors. What they have is a more complex relational sort of systems, but these things are embodied, so they're not something that can be easily spoken about. This is a big, sort of conundrum, we were doing Bruce's film, is that we were trying to get to talk about something that was not very easily spoken about. And
so
that
the mistake we're making is talking about it at all.
Even if you could speak about it, it would be like asking a fish, so what do you think about the water? And the fish would say, well, what water are you talking about?
Yeah, but what it does is it exposes what our narrative frames are. So it's
an opportunity to step out of that.
Yeah, I see
look at how you might be able to.
I see it as like a mirror, sort of finding out what is and isn't expressible. And another thing that I've found really interesting, and I can't find so many examples of it. There'll be Indigenous ceremonies, based around a psychoactive substance, the Wararika and the Yaminawa, where there'll be intentional language play. Jeremy Narby talks about it in Graham Townsley with this sort of language twisting and these sort of obscure metaphors and these sort of poetic ways of communicating around this state, and the less directly you're speaking, the more power that can have. And unless you count the sort of Ikaros within that, which I suppose you could, I haven't found that many other examples, but I'm also not an anthropologist.
I posted a video of the Icaro, of this sort of curandero in the Ucayali. He's an old man, and it's a very traditional Icaro. It's sung in Quechua, and he's basically saying things like, he basically lists a number of animals and plants that is calling forth. And he says, I'm calling forth the spirit of the bird, blah, 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 come to heal this person. And I'm calling forth the spirit of the plant, blah, 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 come here to heal this person. And that's sort of, it goes like that. It's transcribed in Quechua. If you want to take a look, I'll send you the link and translate it. But basically the meaning is in the part that they know that we don't. And he had to explain to me, he said, this bird that I call the name is this little bird, and it's a little bird. But when the wind blows very strongly, this is the only bird that's still flying, because it can go like this, and it just goes around the corners. So that's why we call this bird. And then this other plant is the plant, and when the river grows, and like Bobinsana, for example, which is sort of a known plant, is this bush. And it's, the rivers in the Amazon, they grow and then they descend a lot depending on whether there's rain or not. So there's usually this sort of beaches full of stones. And of course, nothing very much grows there because, when the river goes up, which is, a few times a year, it turns huge and it just takes everything. Except Bovinsana. Bovinsana is this incredible bush that has just the most fucking incredibly deep roots that just like it will take that, the river will go up and it will carry sticks and stuff and stones. And then when it goes down, the Bovinsana is still there. It's like incredibly strong and incredibly flexible. So then they take a lot of inspiration from this, and then they drink this plant. They make preparations with it and they drink this plant because that they say that's what you get out of it. And they also sing to it because they want to call that power for this particular person for these reasons. But all of this is sort of, in a way, my elaboration. It's rare that they will actually tell you these are the characteristics of the Bovinsana, and that's why we drink it, and that's why. For them, it's sort of understood, and even sort of diagnosis. When you go into like, okay, what is this plant good for? They say, oh, this is a very good plant for the body. And what is this other plant good for? Oh, this is very beautiful and very good, very strong, and it's very good medicine for the body. And you get this answer every time. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't have very specific uses that they know, but that these are not verbalized or necessarily verbalized, right? They either stand somewhere else, or they didn't trust me and decided not to tell me anything, which could also be.
Well, it would probably be if there are myths and cosmologies, where these animals feature, then you wouldn't have to say it,
because everybody understands exactly.
Yeah, if those stories are woven into your cultural mythology.
Yeah, then that would play out in the practices without needing to narrate it unless you're explaining it to someone.
Because when you were saying about the bird on the wind there, lost my consonants. I was almost thinking of it like tarot, where you might have someone in front of you who is in a really tumultuous situation that they can't avoid, and then actually being, flexible in the wind would be really useful, but it goes deeper than that, doesn't it?
Yes, because I guess it's suggesting an attitudinal shift, which is often what you experience in a ceremony situation. Is you come out with this. Mendel Kylan talks about it actually in his work on music for sessions, psychedelic therapy sessions, that you can't have any understanding of what the change will be like until you've experienced it. So the best way to learn to feel safe is to feel safe, and you kind of have to go through that somatic experience process before it becomes possible to conceptualize, rather than being able to give someone a direction to.
But if this isn't well communicated, then surely there's a very limited power that psychedelic substances can have, even for helping people on a very basic level.
That clash must be something that you I think there was a podcast that you did that I wrote down the name of because I really liked it. It was something like my friends aren't helping this. Yeah, when your friends are the problem, plant medicines and commercialization and biocultural conservation. And I really liked this idea of Indigenous people and their cosmologies being met with these Western mindsets that are coming to like heal depression and PTSD and all of these conditions that they just don't have in the context where the plant medicines originally were taken, and just this sense of the clash between the intentions and then the normal prep processes. And I'm just curious about what you feel is going on there between the differences in what the West is hoping to get out of these medicines and the medicines as they're originally taken, and how that's being met as tourism grows.
I think there's sort of two perspectives or two narratives there. One is the very sort of like, you just take a picture of these and, what are the problems with this encounter, and, ayahuasca tourism and the sort of the cultural appropriation, the banalization of indigenous knowledge, etc., etc. And there is sort of like a deeper thread And that has to do with the sort of the fact that it seems that, because ayahuasca is a formula, so it's a preparation of, one or more plants. We can imagine a sort of year zero, somewhere at some point, someone in the Amazon, maybe there was different groups at the same time or at different times, groups of people figure out that they could put these two plants together. There's a moment where that begins. And there was a moment before that where that didn't exist. Nobody had done this before. And then as that discovery, expands to the family and expands to the tribe, and then expands to the next tribe, and then to the next tribe, and then to the next tribe, and then to the cities in the jungle, and then outside the cities of the jungle, and then outside of the countries, all the way to us having this conversation today. We're all connected to that first event, right? And there's two patterns there. One is of expansion. This has never stopped expanding. It is in its nature. It seems to be in its nature. It goes from place to place, and it travels, and it jumps to other groups and to other groups and to other groups and to other people.
But people flood there, which wouldn't always necessarily happen with an expansion.
There was always these interchanges. I mean, among indigenous groups, the most famous healers are always the healers in the other group. They also have this rule of distance, of course, the othering. You need the other. The magical powers are always in the other. We know very much, but there's these people deeper in the forest, and
right.
And this is actually a circle. It's a great story that the anthropologist Tausig tells, and he starts in the Colombian coast. And they tell him with the Afro-descendant communities, and they tell him, oh, we know some stuff here, but of course the Indians in the jungle, they really know. So he goes into the jungle and they say, oh, well, we know some stuff, but deeper in, there's another group that really, really knows this stuff. And he just keeps going deeper and deeper and deeper until eventually he gets to this group, and they tell him, yes, of course, we know a lot here, but in the coast, there's these African people, and they have the real... Right, so that is also happening, right? You need the other, and this has always happened for it to sort of magic and sort of special things. They never happen in your family, right? They're always somewhere else. This is just a human. This is sort of like a human. The grass is always greener.
Unless you're a scientist or a priest. Unless you're a scientist or a priest or a certain personality.
But then you cast that into the past very often. It's like, no, it's the early Christians that really did this right, or the future. It's like, no, we don't know, but in the future, science will know much more. But in this, and then I totally got lost. Where did I start? So this expansion. So if you look at sort of the uses of ayahuasca that are surviving today from the most traditional, communities in the Valpes, in Colombia, etc., that still do Yurupari dances, and they basically brew cold ayahuasca vine by itself, together with a bunch of other things, and they do the sort of ritual dances with trumpets and feathers, and where sort of mythological stories get retold according to a sort of an ecological calendar that goes. Over there, things are very much having to do with relationships with animal spirits, relationships with hunting spirits, and sort of having, things like, making sure that survival, and then as things get, indigenous groups get sort of, they lose the sense of identity, and they begin to live in the riversides, and then they begin, colonization happens, and they begin to live in things closer to cities. Then this sort of curandero thing arrives, where the slowly the the feeling of ethnic identity is lost, but not the blowing of tobacco, the drinking of ayahuasca. But now it's not it's not something that has to do with sort of so much with politics or consensus or identity, but with healing, strictly with healing, and it becomes folk medicine. And then the Brazilian churches come, and it turns into a sacrament. And then now the psychotherapists come, and it turns into like a psychotherapeutic tool, right, for analysis. So if you look at these things from bad luck hunting all the way to psychotherapeutic tool, then it seems that the uses of ayahuasca keep changing. But if you take a wider sort of look, then you realize that actually there's a constant, and it's that it always serves as a sort of adaptogen. It takes the role of helping humans figure out how to live how to live in their circumstances with their conditions and their problems. So in those, very traditional groups, hunting and the relationship with the powers are very important. And for us, we're all sort of lost in these sort of things about who am I and what do I want to do, and what is my trauma and what is blocking me and whatever. Very, very, very psychological. So that there's two things that are always happening there. One is that it expands, and the other is that it serves always this function, and this function changes in different cultures. The needs of the culture change, but the function is the same. It has to do with how should I live. So when how should I be better or right with whatever my main problems are? When the psychedelics get medicalized, like they're doing now, and they say, okay, this is a great medicine for PTSD, or, treatment-resistant depression, etc., which is, a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing that people will have access to these, and they're very promising tools. But it's also a sort of an amputation of something that is much wider, because you just say, well, this is just a medicine, or this is a medicine, but which is a way of saying this is just a medicine. But the thing is, it's never been just a medicine. No, not historically, not when you look at other things. And not even when you look at people drinking ayahuasca today. I mean, Westerners, most of these people don't have a medical diagnosis, and they never will. They're not ill in the sense that our doctors would prescribe something to them. They're dealing with other issues, existential issues, meaning, self-knowledge. And the sad part of this is that there could be, sort of the sad end of this would be if they would just sort of amputate this, because, the only people in our societies who can handle medicines are medical doctors. So then it's great that there will be psychedelic medicines, but would this mean that only medical doctors, that this will be like, like whatever, like Valium, or antibiotics and all other prescription medicines that, that only doctors can use. So
the need to have the relevant condition in order to use it, which I think will establish PTSD and depression and all of these conditions even more so as the things people have than they already are, because people will need to fit the criteria to have the cures.
I think change needs to happen at like the earliest level of education, of getting people to think more contextually and getting people to recategorize and actually.
And I wonder if there's a single sort of prescription medicine in history that has gone from prescription medicine to something that anybody can have. I don't think doctors let go of their.
Has Viagra not done that?
Can you just buy Viagra though?
You can in the UK now. I think because we've got a bit in our cannabis report in my old organisation, the Conservative Drug Policy Reform Group, about hoping that cannabis could potentially follow the path of ayahuasca, and that's how the adult use. Viagra, very, very bad mix up there. And hoping that cannabis could follow the path of Viagra and be something where the adult use market emerges out of everyone just being so desperate to buy it that it eventually made sense to just give it to them. But I don't know if that's realistic, but Viagra was very much drawn in as the one to compare it with.
It's a good comparison, because there's very few, most people really, psychiatrists are not. I don't think psychiatrists are used to people being interested in their drugs outside of the context of psychiatry. Like nobody cares about I'm gonna try an antipsychotic to see what happens, or an antidepressant, or sort of like or lithium, or any of these. So generally speaking, the society at large has no interest in psychiatric drugs whatsoever. Outside of and even inside of. But these things, people are going to be there's many people that will want to take them that are not, that don't have a diagnosis. So, how are they going to handle that is going to be very interesting.
Yeah, it is. It really is.
a few years ago I read a book called Listening to Ayahuasca by Rachel Harris, and she's very, very much into the grandmother ayahuasca conceptualization, which we were talking about with Jeremy Nabi last week, is not necessarily a conceptualization that's shared by any of the indigenous cultures, but it's one that's really taken hold in the West. But
it's one of theirs,
if you extrapolate that, then she actually does a really beautiful job of narrating this relationship that she has with her conceptualization of the spirit of ayahuasca, and how grandmother ayahuasca is visiting her and saying, no, maybe put that chapter later, and kind of helping her craft the book. And I'm wondering if you had anything similar with your relationship with ayahuasca as it manifests for you when you were making the films, and kind of a sense of the plant being a co-director, or suggesting ways to deploy the film once it was made, or anything like that, or kind of difficulty representing it how it wanted to be, or anything in that ballpark.
I have a story about that. When we were starting filming the Jungle Prescription, we finally got the funds, and we were in Peru in the jungle, with Gabor and all of this, and the shooting was going to begin. And we went to drink ayahuasca, and I drank ayahuasca, and I asked the ayahuasca, okay, so what do you think about this? What do you think about us, making this film about you? And then I saw this vision of and it was the branch of a tree, and there was one of these like tree monkeys, the ones with a long tail. And it was standing on the tree, and there was a cable that came up with a lavalier mic that was like clipped on the monkey's on the fur, like one of those like interview mics, the little black ones with a cable, and it was like clipped on the monkey. And I thought, of course, it's like, making a film about ayahuasca is like putting a microphone on a monkey. Certainly you're going to capture something, something is being captured, but, think about everything that you're missing. It's like, what can you film? Of course, the ridiculous thing about making a film about ayahuasca is you're trying to make a film about something that happens inside of people. There's nothing to see. People are sitting there with their eyes closed. Sometimes they shake a little bit, sometimes they cry, sometimes they puke. Generally speaking, that there seems to be an ongoing debate that never ends about, whether it's psychological, whether you're listening to yourself, or your subconscious, or it's actually something external of you that has its own agency and stuff. And whether the spirits are real, or they're just projections of your subconscious, whether your visions are true, or they're just some sort of like symbolic manifestation of and people get caught in these rabbit holes. I tend to avoid those discussions, even those sort of thoughts, because I think it doesn't matter, and probably both things are true at the same time. Not probably, certainly. What's the really, really interesting question is, what are you going to do with it? And that question stands there regardless of what it is, right? So you have a vision, and you've had an encounter with a being that appeared in front of you and asked a number of things, or asked a number of questions of you. Now, what are you going to do?
Listen to it.
Or not, but I mean, but decide, right? The question is that one. It's like not what is this, but what do I do?
Yeah. So what's your how do you conceptualize ayahuasca? Do you have an image, or does it depend on the context as well?
The way I have seen it, when I have seen it, it's been a woman, often a young woman, sometimes even like a girl. Like, I even once I saw her as a sort of Peruvian, they wear the school uniforms in Peru with the skirts and the white socks, and like this, other times, but always very shy. The encounters are very fleeting, and I am, sometimes it's sort of trees, and it just sort of runs behind, or is hidden. And I've even been told this a few times. Like, it's like that. They're very shy. You saw her, but she's not going to. That's for me. Some people get full presentations of of whatever. But that's how I tend to see it. I don't stop to think about whether this is my projection or
Will ICES have another conference next year or sometime soon?
Yeah, next year. There should be another ayahuasca conference next year, same place in Girona. It should have been in Colombia, but it was just too much work. Couldn't hack it. Girona will be much easier. So yeah, next summer of 24, it should be in Girona.
That's a good location as well, and it's pretty.
Yeah. I hope they still want us in the city, because it's a sort of small, sort of conservative city, and now it's getting. Now with all of this bad press about ayahuasca and sects and stuff in Spain, I hope it doesn't influence the local politicians.
Good point.
Do you think that it would be better if there wasn't that press, or do you think that it can be a helpful part of addressing the things happening?
I was thinking today that the sort of things that they point out, which is true, the sort of, sort of either ignorant or malevolous facilitators, the sort of personality cults and, sort of strange power dynamics and, a lot of these things.
That particularly happens with the Western adoption of ayahuasca.
As well, very much.
That they're sort of, they're to ayahuasca what hooligans are to football,
That's
there. It's there, it's always gonna be there. It's not gonna go away. You probably can't stamp it out. Some people are gonna be attracted to that aspect of it. But to say that, generally speaking, football is sort of an unhealthy thing, well, I mean, not really, Football, mostly, gives people pleasure, and it's a form of sport, and, makes them healthier, and, generally speaking, and it's a big industry, and, all of these things. And then, yes, there is also like a sort of, this sort of kind of, maybe not so nice underbelly to it that is always there. It's minority.
It's not really related to football. It's just the football is an outlet.
Amazing.
I have a question. So it's that tangent. Sorry.
Yes, very much.
Have you had anything of the Datura family? Any kind of
No, I'm really. I mean, I've done some dieta plants that are related. Ushpawasa Sanango and Uchu Sanango, and I think those two are sort of relatives there, or there's some sort of. The other one is Chirik Sanango. All the Sanangos have some sort of. I think they're cousins, or I can't remember. I would have to look it up, but never the proper sort of datura. Also for the same reason, it doesn't appeal. I don't know anybody that wants to do it again. I've heard some terrifying stories, and I've also heard a few stories of it done right. I mean, this is like, there's a sort of traditional way of doing it. It lasts 3 days. You're usually put in a cabin, and you're being looked over by somebody else. So then you can just go into this completely sort of disassociative, experience, go into your own world, but without going into sort of, the panics that happen to people with this, because they usually wake up in a place that they don't recognize, and they don't remember what they've done, and everything that they remember actually didn't really happen. And this creates for a lot of anxiety, so you can remove all of that just by putting the person in a very safe place, a small cabin, and keeping them there for 3 days. And then, when they wake up, they see you again, and the person asks you, so what did you see? And then you go ahead and you explain what you saw, and it's not so scary. But
actually makes sense. I haven't, but when I was staying with Lewis Luna, he we watched some bloom, and then he said to rub 3 flowers onto my face and go to sleep. And for him, it allows him to have lucid dreams. And that didn't happen, but for about 3 days, I kept mistaking everything for animals. Like, I'd see a bin bag and I'd be like, a cow! Oh, a bin bag. But it was like every minute for a few days. And he'd gone, and it was a sort of like, got quite embarrassing after a while.
I wonder if we'll run into some distinction between kind of lucid dreaming, lucid waking, like the dreaming that's happening.
Hello, Charlotte.